in testimony before Congress, said that you were okay, as you well know, with $10 of spending cuts for $1 of tax revenue.
Yeah,
that's a different position than every Republican candidate in the primary.
I know, because we have unsustainable deficits.
But I haven't heard Governor Romney say, I take that position back, that I'd be prepared to raise taxes.
No.
That was Jeb Bush trying to talk a tiny bit of sanity into Mitt Romney and the Republican Party on Thursday. The former Florida governor continued his efforts today in an interview with reporters in Manhattan. Back to my dad's time and Ronald Reagan's time. They got a lot of stuff done with a lot of bipartisan support. He said Reagan, quote, would be criticized for doing the things that he did. That earned Jeb Bush this response today from anti-tax enforcer and Reagan worshiper Grover Norquist. There's a guy who watched his father throw away his presidency on a 2-to-1 ratio of spending cuts to tax increases promise, and he thinks he's sophisticated by saying that he'd take a 10-to-1 promise. He doesn't understand. He's just agreed to walk down the same alley his dad did with the same gang, and he thinks he's smart. You walk down that alley, you don't come out. Joining me now, MSNBC's John Heilman and Jonathan Capehart. John Heilman, you wonder if the younger generation of Republicans, like some of these current governors, understand what Ronald Reagan actually did as president and the kind of compromises that he actually made with Democrats.
Well, Lawrence, some of them clearly do. Governor Bush, I think, understands exactly
what does.
He does. And I bet there's a lot of Republican governors around who think the same thing that Governor Bush just said. They just, in some cases, are more politic than he is about saying those things publicly. But this is, there's a lot of amnesia about Ronald Reagan and the kinds of deals that he made with Tip O'Neill. It's true what Grover Norquist said about George Herbert Walker Bush making a deal on the deficit, as you remember well, with Democrats back in 1990, 1991. But there is some question about whether or not that deal was the thing that led to George Herbert Walker Bush's undoing in 1992, or whether it was the macroeconomy that hurt him. But this is apparently going to be bad surrogate week for Mitt Romney, just as bad surrogate week for Barack Obama were the last couple weeks when he had to deal with Bill Clinton and Cory Booker and Ed Rendell. We're heading off in a different direction with the surrogates gone wild.
Let's listen to what Governor Walker said this weekend invoking Ronald Reagan.
I just hope he takes a page out of President Reagan's playbook in 1980, where it was not only a referendum on the failed policies of President Carter at the time, it was also something where President Reagan laid out a clear plan. I don't think we win if it's just about a referendum on Barack Obama.
Now, Jonathan Capehart, I don't know Scott Walker, but I look into his eyes on TV, and I believe I'm seeing a Hannity Republican who simply has no idea, no information whatsoever, has no idea that Ronald Reagan raised taxes 11 times as president.
Probably not. Look, Scott Walker is a governor whose time is now. What I mean by that is he's a Republican governor in a party that, as Jeb Bush said, they don't like compromise. Look at how Governor Walker started his governorship, just plowing right ahead, just stripping collective bargaining rights. Today you hear him expressing some contrition, but he's still plowing ahead. But the one thing Scott Walker does say in that clip, it's the second half of that clip of his statement of Governor Romney, where he said Governor Romney can't just talk about how bad President Obama is. He has to talk about where he, Mitt Romney, wants to take the country. And on that, I completely agree with Scott Walker.
Jeb Bush also said another reasonable thing. He watched his father in the presidency struggle with a difficult economy and a recession, and he has acknowledged that President Obama has a difficult economy to struggle with. He said, Jeb Bush said, I don't see how we get out, notwithstanding who's president. We've got major headwinds with Europe and a slowdown for Asia as well. John Heilman, what does that kind of reasonable talk and understanding of the real world do to Jeb Bush's standing in the current Republican Party? I mean, it sounds like he's not the kind of guy they're going to want on the convention stage.
Yeah, I think that Jeb Bush, look, I mean, there are a lot of things that he's doing, that kind of statement, Lawrence, and the other things that he said in the course of the interview that he did today, the interviews that he'd done over the last couple of weeks, the thing about the deal that he'd make on taxes and spending, taking a lot of spending cuts if he would be willing to raise taxes to get that kind of a deal to get the deficit under control. He was critical of the party and to some extent of Mitt Romney on immigration this morning in his interview with the reporters at Bloomberg. He is not a guy who sounds to me like a guy who's trying to get a big place on the convention floor in August or September with the Republicans. It's certainly not someone who's angling for a VP slot. I think if you're thinking about the Floridian who's going to get the higher profile slot, that's going to be someone who's a much more doctrinaire Republican, as Jonathan Capehart said, of the moment, someone like Marco Rubio, who toes the Tea Party line a lot more aggressively than Jeb Bush ever would or could.
To my wonder, the Republican Party, which used to be the law and order party, starting with Richard Nixon and forward, is now the fire the police, lay off the police party. Let's listen to John Sununu defending the idea that, you know what, we have too many cops in America. We have too many public school teachers in America. Let's listen to that.
Let me respond as a taxpayer, not as a representative of the Romney campaign. There are municipalities, there are states where there is flight of population. And as the population goes down, you need fewer teachers. There are places where just pumping money in to add to the public payroll is not what the taxpayers of this country want. I think this is a real issue, and people ought to stop jumping on it as a gaffe and understand there's wisdom in the comment.
Jonathan Capehart, he didn't have a prescription for the places where the population is increasing and how many teachers or cops that they need.
Yeah, this is one more statement from the land of Mitt-Believe, where suddenly we don't need cops, we don't need firefighters, we don't need teachers. Could you imagine if a Democrat had said this, or if President Obama had said this today, or even 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, a Democrat making that kind of statement? Why this particular gaffe hasn't gotten more attention is beyond me. Maybe it's still suffering in the shadow of what President Obama said on Friday, but the idea that we don't need cops, teachers, and firefighters is just astounding to me.
The
come from a Republican.
Law and Order Party becomes the Fire the Cops Party in the 21st century. I didn't see that one coming. John Heilemann and Jonathan Capehart, thank you both very much for joining me tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Coming up, Walmart. Yes, Walmart has commissioned a poll of women in swing states that has produced surprisingly positive results for President Obama. That's next. And in the rewrite tonight, a Southern pastor lynches President Obama in effigy. You have to see this. And he claims that the president's race had nothing to do with the imagery he selected of lynching the president. He has a lot to explain now to the Secret Service, who've been calling him. And later, the two most sought-after people in Hollywood are the two people you have never heard of. They're going to join me here in our Los Angeles studio. That's coming up.